Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of our podcast, Sleep, Pray, Drug. I am joined today here again by my 3 beautiful sisters. We have Mo,
Hello.
Dolly,
Hello.
and Megan.
Hi.
And we're coming into episode 6 with the topic of my oldest sister, Mo's son, Cael, who had a reaction to a vaccine when he was a newborn. And just for some context to this, when we started out this podcast, our first episode was called Suffering, the Greatest Equalizer. And Dolly and myself shared aspects or points in our life that were really transformational and challenging in regards to suffering. And so today, Moe is coming forward with her courage and vulnerability to share about her eldest son, her firstborn son, who had a traumatic brain injury as a result of a reaction from a vaccine. And so this episode will talk about vaccine injury. And we don't want to make this political. We're just going to be giving the facts around Cael's injury and the events that followed and how life has been with Cael. So with that, Moe, thank you for being courageous and vulnerable in this moment. I know it's a hard thing to talk about, and then we're going to have a little bit of Q&A because quite honestly, we sisters haven't heard the story in its entirety, and I think that we will have some questions too. And it's just a good time as vaccines are coming back into the fold of information and news, not to scare anyone, but to just give some context and history to her experience with vaccines and our own experiences with our own children as a result of Cael's injury. So Moe, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Cael was born on March 1st, 1993. He was the second of 4 children. His older sibling, my only daughter, was 2.5 at the time when Cael was born. It was a normal, healthy pregnancy, and Cael weighed in at 8 pounds, 5 ounces. At 2 months of age, I took him to his first well baby check appointment. He received the recommended vaccines, and the pediatrician reassured us that he was progressing nicely without any problems or concerns. July 13th was a typical day for us. I had returned to my teaching job, and Cael's dad was working. I'd picked up Cael from daycare and took him to his scheduled 4-month well baby check appointment at 2:00 in the afternoon. After that, I took him to my mother-in-law's house for her to watch him while I was at a hair appointment. Cael's dad planned to pick him up there on his way home from work. I got a phone call around 7 p.m. from Cael's dad. He indicated that when he'd attempted to wake Cael up and put him in his car seat, he was shaking and making strange sounds. I left the hair place in a panic to get to Cael. Upon arriving, I observed Cael having what I thought was a seizure. We called the pediatrician. He suggested taking Cael's temperature. We did, and it was 101.6. The doctor indicated he suspected Cael was having a febrile seizure from the fever. He told us to get to the ER and that he would meet us there. Cael was taken back right away while he continued to seize. His doctor tested for meningitis, drawing up fluid from his spine, all while the seizure continued. The results were negative, and it was then that he administered diazepam to stop the seizure. So this was after 90 minutes from the point at my mother-in-law's house where he started until he stopped from the diazepam. I was left wondering what we had just witnessed. The doctor told us that he felt it was a febrile seizure, and although it wasn't very high, that perhaps his brain was more sensitive than others. Based on information we had at that point, we thought that the seizure was a one-time occurrence. Little did we know it was just the beginning. Cael seemed to be okay that night, although I was pretty nervous and scared that he would have another. I was sure to stay ahead of any returning fever should that trigger another. So I was staying on top of the ibuprofen to make sure the fever didn't have a chance to spike. The next day, there was no sign indicating what he'd been through. I stayed home from work in order to monitor him closely. In the 3 months that followed, there were no further seizures. In October, at the age of 7 months, Cael had 5 seizures in a 24-hour period of time. He was running a fairly high fever this time, and it was after he broke out in a rash on his body and the fever subsided that the doctor told us he had roseola, which is a common childhood viral infection. During this 2-day period of time that he had had those seizures, we met at the ER with his pediatrician again and a neurologist. It was decided that perhaps Cael should start on an anti-seizure med at this time. In the months that followed, the seizures picked up in frequency, a few lasting 8 to 10 minutes. Med changes were constantly made, and there were more trips to the ER. They began to occur without any fevers triggering them when he was fine and healthy. When Cael was 1, we took him to Children's Hospital in Seattle for a consult with a pediatric neurologist, as there were no pediatric neurologists in Alaska. There were also additional trips to the ER and constant changes and meds, as none seemed to control his seizures. Throughout this year and a half, we were also navigating our jobs, still working full time, and I was beginning to start the process to apply for medical leave so I could stay home with Cael. We also had Cael's older sister, Bree, to give focus and attention to, as it was a scary time for a 4-year-old to be witnessing the medical crises that were happening. During these early years, I'd watched a few news segments featuring parents who felt that their child had suffered a reaction to a vaccine. These reactions ranged from rashes, fever, and persistent crying to seizures and severe neurological damage. At this time, the light switch went on. Could this be what happened to Cael? This question got the ball rolling. I had to get some answers to explain what caused this medical situation to occur and continue. Our little guy was in such bad shape, and it was heartbreaking and scary to witness. So I started researching, investigating more into this possible cause. There seemed to be a strong correlation between Cael having had his vaccines and just 6 hours later having a 90-minute seizure. It hit me and drove me even further to pursue this possibility. Cael's doctor did file a reaction report with the vaccine adverse event recording system, as the pediatricians are required to do if any of their patients have any kind of a reaction to a vaccine. After that, I became aware of the National Vaccine Information Center. I found out that I could request a copy of Cael's shot records from that 4-month appointment, then request the master list of lot numbers associated with any DPT reactions reported from July 1st, 1990 to October 31st of 1993. I got the report. It had Cael's lot number from his DPT shot he had reacted to. I scoured the 17-page booklet, this master list of lot numbers that had 992 different lot numbers in the booklet. I was looking to see if Cael's was listed, and there Cael's was on page 8. There were 152 reactions and 4 deaths associated with it at that time, and it was the 4th highest lot of all the lot numbers of the 992. This is what confirmed what we suspected. Cael had reacted to his DPT vaccine. This led us to the discovery of the program for filing for compensation for vaccine injury. Cael met the criteria for filing, and the government indicated he had suffered a vaccine injury. And the criteria for him being eligible at that time was having 1 seizure within 3 days and a second seizure within 6 months. So he more than met that criteria. What followed was 5 years of gathering our evidence, including every imaginable record, assessment, evaluation, medical records, IEPs, doctor's notes, receipts, and out-of-pocket expenses. This was submitted, and within the following 5 years, his case was resolved. It had moved forward, and the process of at least filing for the compensation and having a settlement was done. During this time, Cael started to show developmental delays and was lagging behind in many milestones. He was making vocalizations but never developed language. His doctor, I remember, had suggested he wasn't talking because boys are often delayed. So I went with that for a bit until 4, 5, 6 years old, he still wasn't talking. So I knew it was because of the ongoing seizures he was having. He became eligible for special education services at the age of 3, targeting the area of speech language. And that's typically how kids start receiving services in a special ed preschool is due to delayed language. And then often there will be other things that are noticed. Bigger gaps in development and struggling academically, physical therapy issues, things like that. His gaps continued to widen over the years, and he required increased support between the ages of 3 and 22. And by the time he left the Anchorage School District, he had been in self contained classrooms with other kids with significant disabilities, probably from middle school through high school and beyond. He is now 33 and functions at a 2-year-old level in most areas. He requires 24/7 care. He has never had his seizures controlled. He communicates with eye gaze and gestures. He's never developed with any independence with any life skills and needs constant supervision due to ongoing seizures and safety concerns with his poor balance and physical challenges. He has had quite a few falls over the years, requiring stitches or staples, falls from whether it was seizure related, but most of them were from just poor balance and falling. He also has a collapsed arch in his foot. His mobility has been compromised a bit with that, and that can easily throw him off balance as well. Cael has a sweet and loving disposition. He knows love, happiness, safety, security, being cared for, and adored. We are blessed to have him present with us, and we have learned to navigate life with a sense of normalcy to the best of our ability. Cael gives us the strength to do that. He has amazing siblings who love and care for him deeply, who, as they've grown up, have become compassionate, accepting, and non judgmental towards those who experience disabilities. And this, meaning Cael, has been a wonderful gift for them. So I just wanted to add something about the vaccine itself. When Cael got his vaccine in 1993, at that time, the pediatricians were using the whole cell uh, pertussis, which is inactivated whole Bordetella pertussis bacteria. And the DPT, this whole cell pertussis vaccine, is linked to the high rates of reactions. And I think Japan was the first country that developed the acellular pertussis, which is what doctors started replacing the DPT with this acellular pertussis, the DTaP. Um, and this all happened in the 90s. So that transition between the different kinds of vaccines were happening in conjunction with um, Cael's injury. And it was the whole cell pertussis vaccine that he received. And with the DTaP, there's far fewer side effects, and it's not the whole bacteria, it's just parts of the bacteria that are added with all the other things that they put into a vaccine. But it is known to be less harmful. And in that booklet of the master list, those were all regular DPT shots that were given in those years before they fully switched over to the acellular vaccine, which is safer. So that was definitely a factor when talking about the different pertussis, in particular, that vaccine and the problems associated with that. So I just wanted to clear that up, the difference between the two. And from then on out, pretty much all the doctors started administering the DTaP to replace the DPT. So, yeah, so that is Cael's story, our story. It's become a lot of people's stories over the 33 years, but it's a special story that we hold close to our hearts. And um, despite the challenges, it's been a real blessing in a lot of ways. And a lot of people can attest to that. Yeah.
So, Mo, I have a question for you. When you brought
Hmm.
Cael in for that vaccine, at that point in time, were they distributing the paper flyer that they give you that lists the potential warnings?
Yes. And I
Okay.
vividly remember, I think we had to sign permission too at that time.
Okay.
But I remember seeing a pamphlet and I remember the statistic. It just is ingrained in my head. It was 1 out of 1,250 infants will have a seizure following a vaccine.
Uh,
So that's what was shared in the pamphlet. And then we signed and did, what other parents do. We move forward with vaccinations. So I'd be curious to know today what those pamphlets look like or what information is shared at a pediatrician appointment. That's why we were thinking it was a one-time occurrence. It didn't say 1 out of however many will have a lifelong seizure disorder. It was just a febrile seizure. So we thought, okay, it just happened. And then even with the roseola, which that is characterized by a very high fever. So again, I was kind of in my mind thinking, well, it was triggered by the fever after his vaccination, even though that one wasn't that high. But this one with the roseola, you can have fevers up to 105. And Cael's was 103, 104. I remember putting ice packs in his armpits to cool him off as, a baby. And but he had those 5 seizures during that time that he was sick with roseola. So after that, I don't recall exactly when his first seizure was without fever, but they started occurring with and without fever. At that point in time, they were all seizures while he was awake. He didn't have them when he was sleeping. Later on, around middle school age, there was a shift. And I remember it was right after we made a medication change. We put him on a different med, and it switched to the seizures happening while he's sleeping. It's the most bizarre thing, but there was never any explanation or any reason given for. Anyways, we spent years trying to find, patterns and triggers and, knowing there's a lot of factors in what causes a seizure. But until he started having those seizures when he was healthy and well, we just thought they were fever related. So,
Other than the medications, Moe, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other interventions like the keto diet and the
sure. I think when Cael was in preschool, that was the first time we tried the ketogenic diet, which is a high fat diet, and it keeps your body in a state of ketosis. And this somehow had a positive effect on controlling seizures for some people. And with that, you have to, check the level of
ketones?
ketones. Thank you. It used MCT oil, butter, just with enough, and heavy cream was the other main component. And then just enough fruit and vegetables, to keep him, I guess, somewhat, um, in the capacity of eating other foods that are healthier for him. But the majority of every meal was with the oil, butter, and heavy cream. And we had to go both times he was on it, we had to go down to Children's Hospital in Seattle to go through training with the specialists that do the diet. They give you 3 sets of ratios, the menus, what you can make. You start with, I think it was like, there was like 4 to 1, 3 to 1, 2 to 1. And with each step, it's more amounts of the high fats and scaling back on the protein and carbs. So I was making little soufflés, for example, in those little, yeah,
Mhm.
in those little, dishes, those little crocks, and with the cream, egg, oil, butter, and then maybe a little bit of chopped broccoli mixed in. It was like a little quiche, I guess, a keto quiche.
Mhm.
But it was a lot of having to learn, and meeting with the nurse and the dietitians at Children's Hospital. And with that, though, came having to keep eyeballs on him at all times. And, being a 3-year-old in preschool, having snacks is a huge part of the day. Well, Cael's snack was ice chips. He could suck on a few little ice chips. No goldfish crackers, no Cheez-Its, no special treats. So that was kind of a full-time job, because even a goldfish cracker, if you're in ketosis, a goldfish cracker can throw you off. So the school had to get on board. We had to go over all that with the school, and they were very willing and, able to do that. And I believe he went 6 weeks without a seizure. But eventually the
Well,
seizures came back. So we went off the diet and then went back to trying medications. We did a second attempt at the ketogenic diet, but again, it kind of followed the same path as the first time. So over the years, he's tried 14 different medications, more frequently in the early years. As an adult now, the age he is, he's pretty much been on the same medications for, gosh, at least 10 years. We also did a vagus nerve stimulator, which is a implant that goes under the collarbone, and there's a wire that leads up to the vagus nerve in the neck. And it runs off a battery 24/7. The neurologist can change the strength of the stimulation to the vagus nerve. They can set it to different cycles, off for 3 minutes, on for 30 seconds, and that's continuously. And with that, comes side effects as well.
I'm just
And a
demonstrating.
magnet. Well, there's the magnet. So when he has a seizure, the magnet just goes on the outside of his shirt for about 3 seconds. And when you remove it, he gets a little strong boost, stronger than normal boost. And the hope is that it will intercept seizures altogether or it will shorten them. Different people have different results. And I guess the main one that stands out for me is when he was younger, he would have a seizure and it would take like 2 full days to recover from one seizure. So I think the recovery time has definitely improved. Sometimes it hypes him up, sometimes he'll fall back asleep, but usually if it happens, during an afternoon nap, which is most common right now, by the evening, he's able to get up and walk around and, he might not be super hungry, but it doesn't knock him out for days like it did when he was little. So that's good. So primarily, just medications and dietary changes and the vagus nerve stimulator, which he had one put in, and the battery life is about 10 years. So every 10 years, the neurosurgeon just has to switch it out. And it's just pretty easy outpatient procedure. So,
Wouldn't you say probably the most transformational medication adaptation? I don't know. Or is it the CBD oil? The research
oh,
CBD?
yes, the
Yeah.
CBD oil. That was brought on board probably 6 or 7 years ago. It was after we moved back here to Oregon. And the neurologist that Cael has now, she shared with us that a lot of her patients were seeing some benefits from CBD oil. So yes, he has a prescription for Epidiolex, and he takes a syringe full of Epidiolex twice a day. But yes, I'd say that's probably helped quite a bit. He still fluctuates, still has patterns where he might have 2 or 3 or 4 seizures, but not nearly as often as he used to. Did I miss anything else with what has been tried?
Think so. I was gonna
Yeah.
ask the other
Uh-uh.
sisters, because I know it did for me. How did Kale's reaction, or in what way did it influence your choices with your kids and vaccinations? And then Mo, I'll circle back to you because I want to know
Mhm.
with your younger kids, because you did have more kids after Kale, your decisions around
Right.
vaccination. So Dolly, Meg, did
And maybe it didn't make a difference, and that's
yeah,
okay too.
yes, yes, totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It definitely made a difference for me because I know that watching Mo go through that with Kale was so traumatizing for the family that I chose not to do the pertussis vaccine with the rest of my kids that were younger at the time. So we just left that one out just in case it was, familial or just to be sure
Mhm.
that we weren't, you know, going to have a reaction or something that it would probably be to the pertussis. So we chose not to do that one. How about you, Maggie?
Well, I think that we were all concerned that there may, because there's so little information about um, this topic, that we didn't know if there was a genetic component to it, and so when I had
Mhm.
Keenan, what I did was I asked his pediatrician what kind of diseases has he seen at higher rates in our area. And with the what's it called now? The DTaP, he did
Mhm.
see a lot of pertussis. And so what I did was I broke the shot up. And so rather than getting the three together, I did the diphtheria Then I did the tetanus another time, and then the pertussis another time. So I did that with
Mhm.
all of his shots rather than have them all done at once, where they're giving, 9 different um, bugs, so to speak. I just
Mhm.
brought him in more frequently and broke up the shots. So that's what I did. What about you, Beebs?
Definitely went along the route that you went. And again, being the youngest, having, the benefit of being able to see how you all navigated these really hard decisions, or it became a hard decision. I think when we were all kids, that was just routine. It was vaccines were, yes, you go, you get whatever the doctor, no questions asked, because I will speak a little bit to the feeling when one has an infant and is going to those well child checks. It is the primary focus. If you are in there for vaccinations,
Yeah.
like that is the
Mhm.
2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. And I remember with Khalil, again, because of the potential familial connection and even just not knowing, like the very first shot that they give, at least the time Khalil was born 19 years ago, was I think hepatitis B, like straight out the womb.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I chose not to participate in that vaccine. And even from that very moment, it was kind of like from a healthcare perspective of like, well, why are you doing? It was more like an accusatory
Mhm.
sense than a really supportive
Yeah.
response. And then from that point forward, I did, yeah, the alternative vaccination schedule. And I had to be quite adamant. I would get so stressed before a well child check because there was no way I was going to do cluster vaccines. Then I couldn't tell what he was reacting to, if there was a reaction. And I do remember, and maybe you all heard this too, was the doctor's primary reply to my asking, why does he have to get 9 shots at one time, was, well, we don't trust you to bring him in again in 2 months. That means it's on you to bring him in multiple times for these vaccines. It didn't impact his health per
Yeah.
se. It was more like parents won't come back. And I do understand the challenge. I mean, I was you know, again, single mom throughout Khalil's early years trying to navigate this and trying to figure out, when he was 2, when he was 4, when he was exposed to different things. He had his diphtheria vaccination 2 years ago before we went to Thailand. Like, that was the first. And even
Mhm.
now, when I go in for myself and get a vaccine, I'm kind of vibrating at a more anxious level. And especially with Khalil, when we had to get vaccines to travel internationally, I was like, take time before you go in. Like,
Yeah.
I think what we saw you go through, Moe, and just the absolute upheaval. Like, you were a special education teacher. I remember as a little kid being like, well, maybe God brought her to special education just because he knew she was going to have a special needs child,
Yeah.
trying to frame it in a light, but it was all consuming,
Mhm.
all consuming every moment of every day for I don't know how many years. And I held Cael when he was 7 months old, having a seizure in my arms, 9 months old, and even to this day at 33, I caretake for Cael. I have him for a couple weeks every other month, every couple of months. We collectively, work together. And even now, the seizures, I don't think they get any easier to at least observe. They still
Mhm.
feel kind of very. It's
They're
kind of a violent.
scary.
Yeah,
In the early years, I was every time he had one, I was on
Yeah.
the phone with the neurologist. I was so scared and worried, and, um, gradually, we kind of sort of got used to them in the aspect that we knew how to give him diazepam to stop a seizure, instead of that panic mode of, "Oh, I have to get a neurologist on the phone." I know what they're gonna tell me, and so we just kinda learned to incorporate that into, everyday life, but they are scary. The first seizure I ever saw was with an adult when I was in college, and he fell down the stairs and went into a seizure. I'll never forget that. And yeah, and for people who haven't ever seen them before, they can be pretty scary because they're, generalized seizures, the full body shaking, eyeballs rolling, discoloration, at times.
Visualization. Mhm.
Sometimes he's
Uh-huh.
very loud
Yeah.
vocally, other times he's so quiet. I don't hear that he's even having one. So, but yeah, when you both had said that the issue with breaking up the vaccinations, we had a pediatrician that said the same thing. And when he told me the only reason they do so many at a time is because they don't think they can get these kids back, that the parents are going to bring them back. And I remember thinking at that time, that is not a good enough reason to put another child of mine at risk.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, just learning that there are options. And it feels uncomfortable inquiring about them at the doctor, but this is just one of those experiences that when you go through it, you do find out that there are options and that we have to be just well-educated parents and don't be, don't be so fearful of, and it's easier said than done because I was in that position, just being scared, dreading going to the pediatrician because I knew they were going to ask me. And I remember one of the kids, every appointment, oh, we see, so and so hasn't had their chickenpox vaccine. My kids were even in classrooms where there were chickenpox cases. And I kind of was hoping they would have gotten it that way, but they never did. And we never did the chickenpox vaccine. And I will say with Cael, because it took about a year and a half to really get some of these things confirmed that there was a correlation. He did end up getting his measles, mumps, rubella vaccine around a year. And then after that, we stopped. Brianna had already had all of her infant vaccinations. And then when she entered kindergarten, we found out we could do a exemption for her to be exempt from getting her kindergarten vaccines. So she had them up to that point. And then the two sons that came along after Cael, we did no vaccinations with them. And I always felt like it was such a catch 22 because do I want to risk another reaction or do I want to risk them getting the mumps or chicken pox? So it was always kind of
Yeah.
like I would feel bad with this scenario, but I would feel worse risking another reaction. So at this point, and then of course with COVID, they're adults now. So, they can make their own decisions with flu and, all the other RSV, all the other stuff that's out there in terms of getting vaccinated against it.
Right.
But I guess, the main message I always just wanted to tell parents is just educate yourself and learn about these vaccinations and what's in them. And, we'll never know. I mean, obviously, the lot numbers show that it likely was the full whole cell pertussis that so many kids were reacting to, that's what happened with Cael, but was there anything about him? Like, why was Brianna okay? Why are some of your kids okay? And, he had this horrible reaction. Was it just he just happened to get a shot from that lot that was being dispersed around the country at the time? W- And as far as the seizures, we'll never know if it was that 90-minute seizure that did the brain damage because when they're infants, it's much harder to see any gaps in development. As they get older, 3, 4, 5 years old, you can pick up on things like that. But it's more difficult when they're babies to see. So, that's he seemed to be okay, which is probably why we went with the MMR until we got all this information and the government said, without a doubt, it was a reaction. And I just wanted to say that now families that are going through vaccine injury compensation program, the government has changed the criteria for meeting eligibility to file for compensation. And like I said, Cael qualified based on having the seizure within 3 days and another one within 6 months. He more than met that criteria, but now that's not even on the list of reactions. Having a seizure be a result of a vaccine is not even on the list anymore. So families going through that process, it's much more difficult now than it was 33 years ago. We didn't have to have doctors testify. Here's the criteria, he met it, and it was done. But it's much more involved, and there's probably families that have a brain damaged child that they will never see any source of at least with Cael, anything that he needs financially, um, there is some peace in knowing that there is a way for him to be taken care of in those aspects. But for many, many families, it's out of their own pocket. It's them being the full-time caretaker, not having anyone to help them out, and just being told, sorry, that reaction is no longer on the list. And if so I think a lot about those families that are just faced with huge challenges and fighting for trying to show that there's some correlation. I think of the deaths that were associated with it, and I think it was kind of typical to list SIDS on the
Mhm.
death certificates as the cause of death. But, as a parent, if you had
Mhm.
a 2-month-old die a couple hours or even a day or two after a vaccine, how could you ever be convinced that there was no cause effect thing going on there? I would never,
Yeah.
I don't think I could ever accept that. That was the only thing that happened
Mhm.
prior to leading up to the reaction. So it was hard all those years with kids going to the pediatrician. I finally told the one doctor after bringing up chicken pox, I finally had the guts to say, you know, I appreciate you asking, but I will let you know when or if the time comes that Riley will be getting the chicken pox vaccine. And that kind of stopped it. She stopped hounding about it. And even with future appointments when the kids were older, they would always say something about, oh, are they all up to date on their shots? And I would just say, well, they have an exemption. They can go to public school with a vaccine exemption. And the doctors would always kind of give me that look of, oh, well, how do you manage that? It's like they didn't even know that you can get an exemption. They always seem so
Hmm.
surprised.
Did you find that doctors knew about the potential for any type of reaction from a vaccine?
Well, they are required to file a report. And
Uh,
Cael's pediatrician told me that, and I probably have a copy of it somewhere where he has to fill out the report, put the lot number associated with it, and all the details, and it gets submitted to the vaccine adverse reaction or event recording system. And that's where that booklet of 900 and
right.
something lot numbers, that's how I'm assuming all that comes to be is. Uh, but it doesn't tell you how many shots are in the lot. So you truly don't know, what reactions have been associated with certain lots, but you don't know how many have been distributed. Was it in one state? Was it among 50 states? I don't know. And they won't, the government never has released that information. So you don't really know the rate of the injuries that are happening. But it feels like it's just kind of like, one of those life situations that until it happens to you, you don't know about the situation or what options there are and how to, keep our kids safe. We have to advocate for them and just kind of arm ourselves with the education. And either way you go, it's scary. But I remember the summer I had the mumps with one of our brothers, and I remember we were pretty sick. And it was summer. I remember mom making a fire in the fireplace for this brother and I. And we had, the dish rags tied on the top of our heads to hold our glands up. But I remember thinking, well, I survived the mumps.
Right.
What if,
Yeah.
Can't believe they took seizures off of a reaction criteria for compensation.
hmm
I don't know what other identifying other than death would there, and maybe that's the goal. Like the vaccine was over injurious and they were putting out, there was too much compensation happening. But I mean, otherwise you're waiting years for what, a delayed response, a traumatic brain injury diagnosis at 8. And then, yeah, you really are absolutely and utterly on your own.
hmm
It's
Yeah.
point of reference for families that are enduring this. But I did want to ask you, did you connect with other families that had vaccine injuries? Like, did you have a community or were you just so busy? That's one thing I've wondered.
Well, at the time, there was a woman who was kind of the state of Alaska contact person. I got her name somewhere along the way, and we had connected. She was really proactive with this whole topic of vaccinations causing injuries. So we connected. There were a few families we met. One in particular I'm thinking of we would take Cael to Challenge Alaska, which was a ski program at Alyeska. And it was run by a group of volunteers that basically the gist of the program is to offer adaptive equipment for people that have any kind of disability, um, paralysis, um, anything that affects their ability to get out on the mountain and be upright in skiing. They have all kinds of equipment. And when we started going, there was another family, and I would see them. They had 3 kids, and I would see the husband and the mom and dad, their 2 kids, and then their 3rd child was in a sit ski where you're sitting and you're tethered and someone is behind you skiing. And her dad would take her out. And as we started talking, we found out the same thing had happened to her. Is a couple of years younger than Cael. But they would, with all 3 of their kids, go skiing. Sometimes it would be with a volunteer, but her dad knew how to be that support person, being tethered while she's sitting down in a sit ski. And then there were people that would take Cael out in a sit ski, and one person would shadow and the other person would be tethered, holding on to the ropes from behind, kind of navigating him down the mountain. So there were people that were associated with the program that we had met too over the years. That one family in particular, the dad went on and established his own business in Anchorage, providing like respite to families and hiring people. So they were very active in the community around, supporting people with disabilities and yeah, a
That's
great
cool.
family. So it was neat to see, her siblings interacting with her and they're just like so unfazed by it. Kind of like how, how the other kids are.
Yeah.
There were times maybe when they were little that they may have been embarrassed or just felt awkward because it can take some getting used to when you're out, with someone who, um, you know, has disabilities. And it's mostly just about like drawing attention to yourself. Sometimes that would be awkward for the kids. Now, as young adults, they're completely unfazed by Cael, and it's just a very normal thing for them. And yeah, so that's been really cool to see.
Our kids too. Like the other
Yeah.
photos, they're all lifting Kale up, and because
Yes,
it is to have a young adult. I mean, Kale has to have a helmet on, and they haven't always been really fashionable things, or if he's drooling or
drool bib.
grabbing
Yeah,
people, he has a tendency to grab all of these things that have really kind of folded our own children into the world of special needs.
just, if he was grabby with someone that didn't know him, I would just say that's how he's saying hi. When he swats at you or touches your arm, he's not trying to be mean. That's just him acknowledging you and saying hi or trying to get your attention. Yeah, because he's very sweet disposition, and I feel so lucky that he's in some ways much easier than my other kids in
Hmm.
some aspects. But he's never been like a physically violent, aggressive, except maybe with grabbing the top of Papa's head when he had.
Hmm.
We always had to make sure Cael was sitting next to Daw on the couch, that he wasn't trying to swing at the top of his head or grab it. I guess he's done that with Mom too. Yeah. Dad would always be cowering, trying to protect his head from Cael.
This is kind of a big question, but I'm just curious, like, as your sister, what has been the hardest thing for you about having a kiddo with special needs?
The hardest thing. First thing that comes to mind is how differently, whether you're talking male, female, husband, wife, your partner, the other adults that are in your inner circle, when there's such a huge difference in how handle and navigate that process, along with navigating all the other big things in life with having other kids and working full time. And I don't know why that came to mind. Probably because it still is currently something that still exists in terms of just how you view the situation. And
You mean like dating, like bringing people into your world?
I was more referring to
Like your
just
marriage?
parenting when
Oh,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
in
Check.
relationships and,
Mm-hmm.
how men and women can be very different and how Cael's dad and I, you know, were different. And I think with me being an educator, I did so much reading in the early years. I had every book imaginable on seizures. And if I had a Friday night without kids to go to Barnes and Noble, likely I'm bringing home a book about vaccines or seizures. I was really immersed in it, but that's not for everyone. Other people might choose to, not really acknowledge it or acknowledge it in a different way or try to stay busy or distracted. So you might not have to acknowledge it or be in the thick of it. And I think all of us have heard that just families with a child with a disability and how it impacts a marriage and relationships. I can say it definitely does. But yet I know of other situations out there where the parents have been on the same page and have grown and evolved and accepted and kind of done everything at the same time in the same way. But that doesn't always happen. And I think when it doesn't happen, that can lend itself to things breaking down a little bit. So I'd say that was pretty impactful because it continued for a long time, going through all the different phases of what happened with Cael. And, you know, it is kind of like going through the stages of grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was hard is Cael, Cael has a cousin who was born on the very same day, um, up in Anchorage 33 years ago. And every year was just kind of a reminder, to see her continue living and going to school. And not that Cael's not living, but I think for dads that can be especially hard when you think about, you know, I won't be there watching a football game or baseball game or all those adult milestones.
Yeah.
That's that was hard too. But I think I'm at a place where I've kind of, accepted that. But um yeah, that was definitely hard.
Well, it's just like it is grieving because it just feels like all these years of wondering what Kale's life would be like had things gone in different
Yeah.
direction. It's like you're sad and grieving over all the things that you see his cousin, for example, doing and realizing that
Every
he's not.
year it was like,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's not gonna be a reality for him. It is a huge grieving process, I can imagine.
Like first there's hope that first year, year 1, year 2, year 3
Yeah.
before some of the milestones. And then as you see, you compare.
And like every year the school goals are the same every single year. Toileting, communicating, helping himself take his jacket off or put it on. I mean, so many years of just repeating the same goals because he never made progress. He never mastered those skills.
Yeah.
But yeah, I often think like, what would his voice sound like if he was having a conversation?
Too, when I see his brothers around, like how tall would he be? What would his stature be? Would he have a red
Yeah.
beard like Riley has a blonde beard? Like what would his fashion or style or
Yeah.
that's the constant that is beautiful, but also very difficult
Yeah.
because that preparing does not go away.
Yeah, when I see those 3 boys together, there is and for many years we thought, well, it's because of all the medical challenges Kale's had that it affected his growth. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that, but when you see him with those other 2 boys, it's like, unless he was taking after me
Mm.
and whoops,
True.
yeah, since I'm the shortest one in the family. But I am glad that he's a smaller frame compared to
Yes.
his 2 brothers
Yeah.
with all the caretaking of him.
Bathing and
Mhm.
diaper change and all of that would be much more difficult on a 6'4" frame. Are you kidding
Yeah,
me? Good
yeah.
night.
Mhm.
Yeah, there was the one other thing I wanna share real quick that came to mind is, Um, my former in-laws who have both passed away in the early years, they didn't understand why I would wanna stay home with Cael, and my mother-in-law would even say, "Why would you choose to make life so much more difficult for yourself?" That was where she was coming from, and, of course, what also was coinciding with that is I think they felt that I was too immersed in the caretaking with Cael that I couldn't focus on anything else, especially my marriage. So that kind of became the reason, for the divorce was because I was choosing to make things so difficult by wanting to stay home and take care of Cael full time. And I just remember thinking, why wouldn't I? There's nothing anyone else can offer him in another facility even to this day, um, that he can't get from here or with you, Bridget, or going over, to see you, Meg, and Dolly and Nana. I just could never wrap my head around that because as a mom, it's like I couldn't imagine him being anywhere else. But they were both, my father in law, he was very old school, raised in an era where people with disabilities were in institutions. And he even asked me when Cael was pretty young, maybe 7 or 8, he asked, "Well, isn't there an institution where he could go to?" And, I said, "Well, not that I know of, but I'm not even entertaining that idea." I'm pretty rational in thinking Cael may need an alternative living situation or space at some point in the future, but right now, I feel like he belongs with family. But, yeah, that was really hard because I felt like she was kinda using my all consumption as kind of a scapegoat for why other things went wrong. Yeah. I mean, as a mom, I just couldn't there wasn't any other option.
Say any because some people respond to trauma in different ways and add like,
Mhm.
know, a brain injury and the caretaking aspect of it. I think some people mentally just would be maybe it would be better in that situation. Like if you were out of the picture and it were
Mhm.
that might be, someone that can handle and will face those things head on and will offer
Mhm.
support and the love. All I'm saying is that avoiding is a very common response to trauma. And it sounds
Yeah.
like you were in a situation where there was a lot of avoiding happening and
Mhm.
went right to the discomfort and in offering comfort, which is what your son needed and still
Right.
need, you know.
And in other family situations where there was a so-called, crisis, I kinda, saw the same pattern. I would go the direction of just wanting to read and learn and problem solve, fix things, which is kind of my nature. And, but not everyone's equipped to do that. I know that now. So yeah, I don't remember who said this to me years ago. Well, if there's anyone in the family that could handle having a special needs child, it's you, Mo.
We
Someone said,
probably have all said that.
"Yep." Well, I'm glad I was chosen.
You were chosen.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm so glad we moved back to Oregon where there's so much family support here. That makes a huge difference.
Uh-huh.
Bedtime. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. Boop. Should we do it again? The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. Doo! Say goodnight, Mom. We love you. Good night, Mom. We love you. Alright, it's bedtime, Bonzo. Silly boy. It's bedtime. Let's protect and keep you safe.